In the mid-1960s, Bob Dylan was a musical and cultural phenomenon. A revolutionary folk singer, constantly provoking the status quo, he produced an immense body of work in a very brief career. With 1965's Bringing It All Back Home, he left the folk world behind him to explore uncharted territory. Dylan epitomised the growing counterculture, baiting the press and the establishment whilst creating some of the most definitive music of the period.
Do you think of yourself primarily as a singer or as a poet?
Well, I think of myself more as a song and dance man, you know.
Revered by fellow musicians for his bravery and insight, by 1966 he had secured his position as the world's most important singer-songwriter. Yet weeks before the release of his seminal album Blonde on Blonde, a motorcycle accident pulled him from the public eye.
It became one of those totems of the whole kind of counterculture that happened because of Dylan. But the guy who created the environment for that to happen had vanished. He'd gone, they didn't know where, and it all went quiet.
This is the story of the years following that disappearance. Dylan struggled to maintain the impetus created by his mid-60s work and his triumphant return to the world stage in the 1970s.
While a lot of people still saw him as a 60s figurehead, it seemed as though halfway through the 70s he was still able to command attention and demand a powerful audience.
While many of his contemporaries failed to accustom themselves to a new decade and an ever-changing musical climate, Dylan emerged victorious. This is the story of that victory, the story of an ever-changing icon. In July 1966, on this road in Woodstock, New York, Bob Dylan fell from a motorcycle and subsequently from the public eye. After heavy touring with the band, being followed by D.A. Pennebaker for a further documentary, and releasing Blonde on Blonde to unanimous praise, the singer literally disappeared from the media arena, retreating to the Woodstock area of New York amid heavy speculation over the extent of his injuries and the seriousness of his condition. Al Aronovitz, a prominent New York Post rock journalist, was the first to interview him about the crash.
Well, he made it sound very dramatic. And now that I look back, I guess he was putting me on. He said, my whole life passed in front of me.
Whatever the reason behind Dylan's retreat to Woodstock, it gave him a significant opportunity to slow down and reassess his life. Re-editing Pennebaker's rushes of the '66 tour, Eat the Document, and spending time with his wife and family, Dylan made no attempts during the close of the year to re-enter the public arena.
The retreat in Woodstock was absolutely vital. If he hadn't got off the roller coaster at that point, I mean, he himself has subsequently said he doesn't think he would have lived. I mean, he was going so fast that it was absolutely unsustainable, and he just had to stop. And the motorcycle accident, whatever the circumstances of it, how serious or not it was, served a very, very important process, really, for him.
He couldn't have carried on like that. There's absolutely no way he could have carried on. And after the motorcycle accident, Dylan spent a long period of time, something like 6 months, sitting and watching the footage of the film that Pennebaker had shot on the '66 tour. And I suspect that Dylan, who was obviously straightening out, probably detoxing at that point, was looking at this footage going, who is this goddamn maniac?
Over the following 2 years, Dylan concentrated much of his time on his wife Sarah and their children. Woodstock represented an idyll in which he could become a very private family man.
I believe that the happiest time in a man's life is when he's raising a family. And I think that a guy like Bob, no matter how miserable he might be, has to look back at that time when he was raising a family as the happiest time in his life. Because his marriage with Sarah, I mean, you know, she was such a calming influence on him. And she never lost equanimity. She was very queenly.
In the early months of 1967, the band began to jam with Dylan at his Woodstock home. The routine later continued at Big Pink, a nearby house the group rented. At 1 o'clock every afternoon, the musicians would gather in the basement to play and record dozens of random tracks in the most relaxed and congenial atmosphere. Al Aronovitz was a regular visitor.
They were just having fun. They were just getting together and having fun, doing all kinds of crazy things that they want to do to have fun. I mean, they would get together and there would be like comedians would get together, and one comedian tells a joke and the next comedian said, the punchline reminds me of another joke, and the next comedian said, that punchline reminds me of another joke. And that's, you know, they would make him go around and sing a song. That song reminds me of this song, and I was mostly entertained by Levon, who sang with the mandolin, who was great. I love Levon.
The resultant recordings, known as the basement tapes, were not officially released until 1975, but circulated for years as bootlegs. A mixture of originals and folk and country traditionals, the songs were far warmer and more laid back than those of Dylan's defining mid-60s albums.
He probably had gone as far as he could with that thin mercury sound, as he called it, that reached its epitome on Blonde on Blonde. It was very hard to see how he could top that. So a change of direction was required. And to delve back into deep into the roots of American folklore, what Grail Marcus called the old, weird, mythic America, was a perfectly logical thing for him to do.
He resented that media speculation and that intensity of fan interest. And the basement tapes are great because it is just Dylan letting his hair down, and he's just having fun. And really, up until then, they were quite saying, "You mustn't have fun. You're Bob Dylan. You know, you're very serious. You know, we want Desolation Row and Masters of War. We don't. You know, you mustn't have fun." So there was that sort of expectation that every Dylan album was a statement. And listening to basement tapes now, you can hear them just, you know, they're just having fun. They're larking around. You know, the bands, going from drums to saxophone, and you know, and yet out of it all, these, you know, there are some incredible performances.
Despite being hidden from his audience and from the relentless gaze of the media, Dylan's year in the wilderness was proving productive, and he began to work on material for a follow-up to Blonde on Blonde.
1967 is the great lost year of Dylan's career. It's also unquestionably the most creative year of his career. So it's this total loss in the sense nobody knows what he was up to, and yet he created more great material in 1967 than any other year in his life. It was an extraordinary creative outburst that produced the basement tapes and John Wesley Harding in a 6-month period, which is an unbelievable achievement. And yet Dylan had shut down. I mean, he'd removed himself from the vortex. What you end up with is that Dylan and, if you like, the counterculture go their separate ways. And again, that was clearly a very self-conscious thing on Dylan's part. I mean, if you read the sleeve notes to John Wesley Harding, where he actually says, "How far do you want to go in?" And the guy says, Frank says, "Just far enough to say I've been there." That is Dylan dismissing his audience and saying, "You do not want to go where I have been. Trust me on this."
John Wesley Harding was perhaps the most eagerly anticipated record Dylan had so far released, a new work from an artist who had spent more than a year in hiding. Yet this album, a spare and visionary collection of songs, was not at all what fans and critics were expecting.
John Wesley Harding was a record like nothing else that was released at that time, 1967. It was stark, pared down, lyrically quite dense, in fact. I mean, it's quite different from Nashville Skyline, where the lyrics are actually very much in the mode of Tin Pan Alley. In fact, John Wesley Harding lyrically draws on the Old Testament and all kinds of quite profound sources, but musically, it was revolutionary.
We've had Sgt. Pepper and Satanic Majesty's Request and all these really extreme, out there albums, and then John Wesley Harding comes out, and it's country music. It's everyone was completely gobsmacked by it, and yeah, I think it's superficially very simple because it is bass, guitar, drums, bit of piano, largely acoustic. But there seems to be a lot of depth to it. I've been reading the Bible a lot, and I think a lot of that, there's a lot of sort of biblical parallels and parables in there. And it just seems to, it's that mystery, and that's what people I think love about Bob Dylan's, that mysterious sense. And I think there's no more mysterious album in the canon than John Wesley Harding.
It's so well thought out, John Wesley Harding. It's Dylan's most perfect album, in the sense that it's so brilliantly conceived, and everything is absolutely in the place it needs to be, and even the instrumentation is perfect for what he's trying to do. But it's an extraordinarily austere statement. You know, it really is notes from the other side, because he's saying, I came out, I'm still here, I'm still intact, but I'm a changed man. A man who writes, if you cannot bring good news, then don't bring any. He's not the man who wrote Desolation Row.
The album was widely praised, and Dylan's return to the music world continued as he began 1968 with his first live appearance since the grueling 1966 tour. The occasion was tinged with sadness, however. The previous October, Woody Guthrie had passed away, and Dylan headlined the memorial concert celebrating the life and work of an artist who had been so influential on his career.
The appearance at the Woody Guthrie concert was the fulfilment of a promise. He'd promised Woody's family and people when he was ill that he expected to be the first name on the bill of any memorial concert, and he was true to his word on that. And it's a fine performance, in fact, which is sadly not in catalogue at the moment. The entire album has been deleted. But there's some of the best performances he ever did with the band, I think, from that concert, which is probably because whatever else was going on in his life at that time, Woody Guthrie remained paramount for him. He was his inspiration, his mentor, and I think you can hear in that performance the genuine love and respect in which he held Woody Guthrie.
Despite the successful release of a new album and a brief return to live performance, while working on new material, Dylan discovered that he was developing writer's block and that his abilities as a songwriter were abandoning him.
Dylan talks about what he phrases as the amnesia, the point at which he suddenly shuts down on a creative level. And he's reasonably clear about this. It wasn't something that happened as a result of the motorcycle accident. It was something that happened later. And it was clearly something that happened after John Wesley Harding. And it was just something that happened. Somebody turned the lights out in his mind. And amnesia is a very good way of putting it, because he just couldn't remember how to do what he did before.
Early in the summer, Al Aronovitz took Dylan and his family on a trip to Fire Island, a beatific locale near Long Island.
Well, I never had too much money. And with Bob, I took him out there because I wanted him to show my house, how nice it was, and then maybe our two families could stay together. Well, it was mostly an artistic community. There were artists, there were show business people on the come, writers, mostly people that that person like me would want to know.
Woodstock was not helping with Dylan's creative problems, and this similarly secluded, exclusive location appeared to be an attractive alternative. Yet in 1969, another town in a different state was calling: Nashville. In February 1969, Dylan flew to Nashville, Tennessee to begin work on his new album. Within this city, the heart of America's country music establishment, he planned to further develop the country elements of both John Wesley Harding and the Basement Tapes, and to record a more traditional collection of material. After 3 unsuccessful days, Johnny Cash visited him in the studio, and the pair embarked on an impromptu session of duets.
Cash had been very supportive over a number of years. Cash was there at the Newport Folk Festival when he was booed, and in fact was the man who lent him the acoustic guitar when he went back on for the encore. But around this time, the two men were very, very close, and I think Dylan drew a lot of strength from Johnny Cash.
Despite the plans for a joint release of the tracks recorded, only one would make it onto an official album. Yet Dylan's new image and sound was given a stamp of approval by this reputable legend, and when later the two played on Cash's new TV show, it boosted sales for Dylan's country work.
On the borderline, remember me, to one who lives there, for she once was.
I think the reason that Dylan appeared on the Johnny Cash show was simply because he was big friends with Johnny Cash. I mean, obviously he'd been doing the sort of a country feel stuff. He'd been recording in Nashville. It was very much sort of stepping into the lion's den, really, for a rock musician to be doing the Nashville thing, the country thing. But it worked for Dylan for a short while, certainly.
If you're traveling in the North Country Fair, where the winds hit heavy on the borderline, remember me to one who lives there, for she once was a true love of mine.
He seemed very uncomfortable on the show. Very much unlike the Dylan of nowadays, when his songs are completely different on record as opposed to his live performance. This was very much a, straight take of the actual record itself.
He made a TV special with Johnny Cash in Nashville in 1969. They also recorded an album of duets. It's available on bootleg, and frankly, Dylan struggles to stay in key, and alongside Johnny Cash's voice, that's exposed quite starkly, which is probably why it never came out. 1 or 2 tracks have come out, and of course they duet on Girl from the North Country on Nashville Skyline.
Released in April 1969, Nashville Skyline was Dylan's most significant departure yet from his mid-60s sound. A short collection of simple songs sung in a mannered country twang. At the time, the press and the public were receptive to the album, but later it began to draw criticism for its lack of strong material and its lyrical simplicity.
I think it would be hard to describe Nashville Skyline as a mistake, because it really did open up a lot of people to country music. What you have to remember is at the time, country music by people of my generation was regarded with contempt. It was drinking music for rednecks, basically, and nobody with any pretensions to being hip or cool would have been seen dead listening to country music. Dylan made Nashville Skyline, Graham Parsons joined the Byrds, and they made Sweetheart of the Rodeo. And suddenly, country music developed a hip cachet that it had never had before, and Nashville Skyline was critical in that.
It's a nice little record, I mean, there's a couple of nice songs on there. It's 27 minutes long, you know, you're wanting a bit more really. Typically they chose the worst song from the Dylan Cash sessions to put on there. Both men seem to be singing a different version of Girl from the North Country. That's the version they released. Yeah, nice instrument. I mean, you know, it's nice. Best thing about it, I think, it's the cover. It's a lovely cover, you know. But it's not. I don't think people play it that often.
The really desperate thing, I mean, I love the sound of Nashville Skyline, but it's, you know, it's an EP. You know, it's a desperately short album anyway, and there's 2 or 3 things on there that are not even B-side status. You know, it's a desperately unfinished thing. He just kind of wants to put something out, but he you know, he's in a dark room. He doesn't know really what to do or where to go.
Yet Ray Folk, a young promoter who with his brother was organising and booking acts for the 1969 Isle of Wight Festival, was very keen to get Dylan to travel to this small island off of Britain and for him to headline their event.
Well, we got Bob Dylan involved in the first place by pretty assiduous negotiation with his management office, with Bert Bloch in particular, and through a lot of pestering and a lot of very careful footwork and persuasion, with first of all being given a no, and then gradually it became a, well, it's always possible, and then he's looking at it, and then he might be interested, and so on. And as the year progressed, in 1969, it got more and more positive. And it just perseverance, really. We were struggling throughout the year to find a superstar. We'd realised from the previous year that you were not going to attract people to the Isle of Wight to go on that ferry journey unless you got somebody pretty big, because not only have they got to make the ferry journey, but it means that they've got to camp, because you can't get back again that day. So suddenly you've got a camping festival, which had not really been tried before in this country, and the only way that you're going to get this to work commercially was to have something big enough to bring a vast crowd over. Dylan was the only name we had in the hat that was of that calibre and was accessible. We had the Beatles, the Stones, and Elvis Presley were the only other 3 giant names that would do that kind of business, you know, that would bring the people over. And Dylan was saying possible. And so we were kind of hanging our hat on Dylan all the way through the summer. And I think it became apparent by June time that the event was not going to take place unless we actually got Dylan. It was as simple as that.
At the same time, promoter Michael Lang was trying to entice Dylan to perform at another festival, which was to take place only miles from his home. Yet the media attention and the sheer size of the Woodstock Festival didn't interest Dylan. He was looking for a more modest stage and a different crowd on which to unveil his new country persona, and the Isle of Wight Festival seemed most appropriate.
I've read some very interesting accounts of that summer and how the Woodstock people who put the festival there had essentially put the festival in Dylan's backyard to try and get him to come out and play. You know, that was what that was about, and Dylan was not going to do that. He did not want to be in that kind of spotlight in America, having not worked for 3 years, and he felt that coming to England to, you know, a small island would be a medium-sized thing. It wouldn't be too big, but it would be reasonable size that would do justice to his status. So I think that was his thinking, perhaps. And then there was the attraction of coming to see the home of Tennyson and Queen Victoria and all the things that we could lay on, you know, and a holiday with his family. So, you know, the things combined and gelled in a way that suited him.
Yet the day of the performance did not run smoothly, and Dylan was famously late on stage. Al Aronovitz, who'd arrived on the island with Dylan, was there to chronicle the tensions.
He was getting antsier and antsier because the band was supposed to go on at a certain time, and he was supposed to go on at a certain time, and the time was just, nothing was happening. And nothing was happening because Jonathan, the road manager for the band, said that the sound system was not working properly. And he was working on it to fix it. Now, the sound system had been working properly up until that point. He keeps sending me back and forth to holler at them to get the thing going. And he's really getting mad and hollering and, you know, cursing. And suddenly, you know, I'm in the position between the two of them, and I'm getting stiffed by the band and by the Jonathan, the road manager, and you know, he's still working on the fixing the sound system, and he won't tell me what's wrong with the sound system that he's fixing. And he never did tell me what was wrong with the sound system, you know. So sometimes I've wondered whether they did that deliberately to screw Bob up.
I'm surprised that Aronowitz is saying that the lateness of Dylan going on was because the sound system was broken. There was nothing of the sort. There are a number of reasons. There's no one reason, but there are a number of reasons that accumulated to cause the problem. The main reason was the press. We had a press arena in front of the stage, and the press arena was also used as a VIP arena. So we had all manner of stars arriving. Now, our press people were perhaps a bit naive in the way they handled it, but after Richie Havens had been on, before the band went on, we cleared the press arena and reissued all the tickets. So that caused a bit of delay in doing that, obviously. Secondly, the band went on. I think that they went on for longer than we'd expected. And I think they were determined to do a full hour or, you know, quite a large set. And I suppose thirdly, there was never a definite timetable when Dylan was going to go on. And Dylan was going to close the show. Nobody was coming on after Dylan. And we didn't want to close the show at 9 o'clock and then everybody's suddenly left high and dry without any more entertainment. So we wanted it to be fairly late anyway. So the lateness probably only amounted to about an hour. So instead of going on at 10 o'clock, he went on at 11 o'clock or something like that, you know. It seemed like an age, but it wasn't really that long, and these things get exaggerated over time.
Dylan's late appearance on stage was only the first problem. His new musical approach and changed image confused fans, and the short performance would later be criticised by the press and public alike.
Certainly his heart doesn't really seem to have been in it. He appeared in this bizarre white suit, looking more like a door-to-door Bible salesman than a rock and roll star. And it was a very perfunctory performance, barely lasted an hour. Didn't play many of the old songs. Those he did, he tended to mangle. And it was for the first time we'd seen him in Britain for 3 years, and it was a very disappointing performance.
Reeling from the critical reaction to the Isle of Wight performance, Dylan again looked to changing his surroundings to find inspiration. This time, however, he chose to return to the city in which he'd made his name, and in 1970 once again moved to Greenwich Village. Almost immediately, he went to work on a new album, one which would involve covers, live recordings and studio work in both New York and Tennessee. Ron Cornelius, a guitarist who would continue to play with Dylan, was recruited to add elements to the record in Nashville after the initial New York sessions.
On Self-Portrait, that was my real entrance with my guitar. And Dylan was in New York, or wherever he was. Who knows where he was. I just went in there, Charlie Daniels and I both went in there, and we put our parts where they go. That album was made over a period of months, and once they had the basic tracks cut, Bob pulled in over a period of time all kinds of people to put what they could offer on those tapes. And the list is about that long, if you look at the album cover. I was absolutely flattered to be asked to play on the record. At that time, for me, to be asked to play on a Bob Dylan record was the pinnacle. That was like, you know, touchdown. You know, and I was flattered that they would fly me out here to Nashville and let me put what I could offer on that record. And I did.
Despite the good intentions of the musicians, Self-Portrait was roundly condemned as a disaster. Seemingly rushed and featuring poor choices from the Isle of Wight set, it was famously greeted by Rolling Stone journalist Greil Marcus with the words, "What is this shit?"
The interesting thing about Self-Portrait is that it was almost as if he deliberately set out to make an album that everybody would hate. It's as if he was so fed up with being the Messiah and wanting to shed this weight, this burden that placed upon him, that he set out to make a record that people would find it very hard to love.
Well, I think Self-Portrait's great on CD. I think it's the great Bob Dylan album. You can skip all the dodgy stuff, and yes, there is some dodgy stuff. When it came out, I mean, it was, you know, every album by a major rock star was an event, and an album by Dylan was like, it was like it was like one of the commandments, you know, hewn in stone. It was carried down from the mountain, and you know, you reverentially received this, and you placed the needle, and what wisdom would come from the Messiah this time, and you got, you know, all the Tired Horses and Everly Brothers songs. I mean, even at the time, I quite liked it.
I mean, today it is quite customary for big artists to put out a covers album. It's a kind of holding water thing. At the time, everything Dylan put out was expected to be a major statement. He wasn't allowed to step back from the plate. But I think if Self-Portrait was released today and it was marketed as, you know, Dylan pays tribute to the great American songbook, the kind of music that he grew up on and loved, you'd get a quite different reaction to it, and it would slot very neatly into that whole Americana kind of paying tribute to our roots movement. Back then, of course, it wasn't seen like that at all. Here was the man who had changed the world, you know, covering other people's songs and coming out with banalities and platitudes.
Dylan was quick to hit back, however. The week before the release of Self-Portrait, he had again been in the studio recording both cover versions and original material. In a short number of days, he and a select cast of musicians, including Al Cooper and Ron Cornelius, recorded dozens of songs at breakneck pace.
He told me, he said, look, I've always got about 400 songs flipping around in my head. Doesn't mean that they're all finished, but I've always got an arsenal floating around in my head. And it wasn't like these are the songs. You learned what songs that he was going to do in those sessions by him announcing it after you cut the one before. And he'd just play them off with his guitar, and we would chart them. And he'd say, has everybody got what they need? Here we go, red light us. And bam, here we would go. Spontaneous, go for what you know right here on the spot. And he would play these things off. Once we got our charts ready, he'd say, you ready? And he'd go. If anybody fell off bad enough to have to do it again, if we had a train wreck and crashed, he'd say, let's do it again. However, at that time, he might count the thing off in a whole different time signature to try to keep us on the edge of our chair. I'm sure that's what he was doing. And it worked. Because if it fell apart that time and he did it the third time, we stabbed it. Either that, or if it crashed that time, he'd say next song and go on to the next song. It wasn't like he was in any lurch for material, put it that way.
His first time working with Dylan in the same room, Cornelius found that the singer was relaxed and calm, and despite stories of his aversion to the studio experience, seemed to be enjoying himself.
When he got out there in the studio, got the guitar on, started doing his thing, I think he had a lot of fun, because over the period of that time, it was kind of like we had this little team, and we of course we'd split out on the town at night and go to the hotel and sleep and come back the next day, but we all couldn't wait to get back in there doing it. You know, it was, and he seemed to be having a really good time being like a part of that thing, which I think is one big reason of why good records get made. You know, you got a bunch of great players in a room with somebody that thinks they're 10 times bigger than you are. It's like that leaks out in the room, and you just go ahead and play your parts and go home. But when you got somebody in there that's having a great time, I don't care if it's a star or if it's somebody just starting out with their career. If they're having a ball and you feel like they're having a great time, you want to play better. It makes everybody want to do it better.
The album that resulted from these sessions, New Morning, was rush released within 4 months of Self-Portrait. The fierce criticisms were silenced, and although the album wasn't deemed vintage Dylan, it marked a significant return to form.
It's a good Bob Dylan album rather than a great Bob Dylan album, but context is all in these matters, and coming literally months after Self-Portrait, and given the title that it was given, which must have been a quite deliberate thing to suggest that this was some kind of new dawn, it was always going to receive probably greater acclaim than it deserved. People were just glad to have him back writing songs. Self-Portrait is virtually all covers. Had the great songwriter actually dried up? Well, New Morning showed that he hadn't.
1970 also saw the publication of Tarantula, the book Dylan had written back in the heady days of the mid-60s, while he was still very much on the roller coaster that would eventually throw him off. Although several bootleg copies had been circulated, the official publication of the book let the fans muse over the inner workings of a now very different man.
Tarantula, although it predates Like a Rolling Stone, it's really almost all of it is written in the period between Bring It All Back Home and Highway 61. It's the same idea that he can just speed write and that the results will be blindingly creative. Dylan, needless to say, only believed that as long as he kept taking speed. Like all people who take speed, it reads brilliantly whilst you're taking speed, you know. If everybody took speed, Lester Bangs would be the most successful author in the world. But, of course, when you actually sit and read it, as just like watching Eat the Document, I'm sure Dylan, the same thing happened with Tarantula. And in fact, we know that the week after the motorcycle accident, the editor got the phone call from Dylan, I don't want to put it out, I'm going to do another book. And I'm sure it's exactly the same thing. He kind of came round, opened it up and went, what the? You know, and, there's wonderful stuff in there. I mean, the Butter Sculptor's letter is one of the funniest things Dylan's ever written, but it's all very self-referential. Like a lot of his filmmaking, it just, you have to be a Dylan fan to enjoy it. And that isn't what Dylan's best work is about. It shouldn't be what it's about. You should be able to sit and enjoy it anyway.
In 1971, Dylan encountered perhaps the most disturbing character in his story, A.J. Weberman. An obsessive, educated fan, Weberman was consumed by the desire to decode Dylan's lyrics and to unlock the secret of their meaning. Coupled with the belief that Dylan was a heroin addict, this led him to repeatedly search the contents of the artist's trash cans, a process he later termed garbology.
What I was looking for was a Rosetta Stone. You know, I was looking for some kind of notes that Dylan would have put together where he gave me some hint as to what his hieroglyphics were about. You know, like first drafts of his work, you know, where I could see where he changes certain things around and he uses a less ambiguous word initially for something that's more ambiguous. But all I found was, you know, dirty diapers and incomplete letters to Johnny Cash, you know, letters from his mother and stuff about his dog Sasha, you know. But what I did by doing that was found a new school of journalism, because I was the first private individual to go through garbage in order to spy on somebody. Prior to that, the FBI and CIA routinely did it on people that they were interested in.
There was this incredible interest in him. You know, the Beatles are broken up, the Stones are in tax exile, the new breed of sort of Bowie and Springsteen hadn't yet broken through. So it was, you know, there was this incredible interest in Dylan, and nobody knew where he was. You know, he rumoured to have been in Woodstock, then he moved back to Greenwich Village, but he wasn't making records, he wasn't doing any announced shows. There was an intensity of interest in him, and that is, you know, the ultimate extreme of that is A.J. Weberman going to his dustbin. I mean, Weberman's like the Uber fan. I mean, he's the Bob Dylan fan just right out on the margins. You know, he's the intensity of interest, the obsession with Dylan is, I mean, it's stalking. You know, it's now celebrity stalking.
Absolutely, positively, without the slightest equivocal doubt, beyond reasonable doubt, it was an invasion of privacy. But, you know, Dylan thought it was someone who was trying to kidnap his kids and trying to clock his movements. So he set up a surveillance camera and was relieved when he found it was me, you know, because he knew that I wasn't going to do any violence to him. You know, but he considered doing violence to me. He seriously considered getting the mob to do a hit on me. And, you know, he'd just jokingly say all the time, hey, man, you want to go for a ride? I said, where are we going to go? He said, we're going to go down to the piers in Brooklyn.
Weberman, unable to find his Rosetta Stone, decided to launch a new attack on Dylan. He formed the Bob Dylan Liberation Front, criticising the singer's departure from overt left-wing politics and the protest song.
Dylan had written a lot of radical songs. You know, I listened to them and I believed them and I believed in the message that he was transmitting. And, you know, he did, during the Civil Rights Movement, he did come out and play in Mississippi and at the Civil Rights March. And, you know, he seemed to be behind what he wrote. But later on, when the Vietnam War began, you know, Dylan just refused to come out and be political and, you know, appear at anti-Vietnam War marches or stand behind what he wrote. You know, and I felt that genocide was going down against the Vietnamese, that something had to be done about it.
Dylan at first considered this to be an overblown joke, but when Weberman began releasing negative articles, he decided to meet him. He was shocked to learn that Weberman had later called his office claiming that he had taped their meeting. Dylan's return phone call is now a bizarre artifact in popular music history.
You called me on?
Yeah.
So about some tape. What tape was that?
No, I didn't take any tape. What I did was I typed out my recollections of our conversation together. And I'm going to use it as an interview. I'm going to send it out to every underground paper in America for free, rather than selling it to...
You didn't tell me that was any interview.
Didn't you?
Hey, man, you want to have an interview with me? Let me know, I'll give you an interview. Don't take...
Okay, fine.
You know, that's sneaky shit, man.
What kind of sneaky shit, man?
I mean, you come and talk to somebody and type it up, right?
But you know I'm a cat who writes about, who specializes in writing about you.
Yeah, man, I understand that, but, you know, if you want to have an interview, we can have an interview above the table, you know? And, you know, just keep it on top of the table, that's all I'm talking about.
Today, if any major star was suffering this kind of harassment, there would be cease and desist orders, or maybe the security would just rough the guy up. What did Dylan do? He rang Weberman up. Wanted to discuss with him what was going on. Very, very interesting that he was actually prepared to engage with this guy and talk it through with him and give him an interview, in fact. Very odd.
After his initial hesitancy, Weberman went on the offensive.
Oh, you don't stand by anything you say, man.
Sure I do. Sure I do.
I just don't dig it. Your old songs, man, that's for sure.
Man, I'm going to do an article on you, man. I think I want to write a song about you, too.
Well, I could use the publicity.
Yeah, well, that's one reason why I wish it, man. But I got a good song, man, if I ever want to do one.
What's it called?
It's called Pig.
I'm a pig, eh?
Yeah.
Oh, bullshit.
Yeah, man.
You're the one who's a pig.
Oh, no, not at all.
Oh,
not at all, man. Not at all. I can't believe you, Weberman. I just can't believe you. You tap phones. You go through garbage like a pig. You do a lot of things, man. We should start really on the up and up. Yeah. No, man, you're not on the up and up.
You pick all these things up. But what did I do with it, man? You see, I may have gone through garbage, man, but I didn't sell it to Life magazine. I didn't sell you garbage to Life magazine.
You think Life magazine's gonna buy my garbage?
I haven't printed it up yet, man. I made a book out of it.
Weberman hit a nerve when ironically comparing Dylan to the folk singers who were still making protest songs.
They're writing songs about what's going down now. That's nowhere. That's a bunch of assholes do that kind of shit, man. What you got to do is write songs like what went down 30 years ago in the fucking escapist music industry. That's where it's at, man. Because people dying, being fucked up is really a good thing. They may not know it, they may not understand it when it's happening to them, but it's really a good thing, and we should let it happen. And, the last thing in the world that you want to do is say something about it. Because then people might, begin to think. You don't want that to happen, because when people begin to think, maybe they'll stop buying your records. Your later records,
That's going to make me think.
The affair came to a close when Weberman frightened Dylan's family while investigating their garbage, and the singer resorted to violence, giving the journalist a well-earned beating.
I got my comeuppance. And it was pretty funny because, I was lying there and I kind of got off and dusted myself off, and these bums, it was on the Bowery, and these bums came over to me and they said, "Did he get much money, man?" I says, "What do you mean? That was Bob Dylan, man. He doesn't have to come down to the Bowery and roll hippies. He's a millionaire." And then I got a wine bottle and went to the corner, and Dylan was stopped at a light. And I says, "I'm going to get this Mother Brooklyn style, dirty fighting and street fighting, So I took the bottle and I said, "I'm going to hit him with this bottle and knock him off that bike." And then I said, "No, I can't do this." I says, "I did wrong, and, I got what I deserved." And Dylan, he came upon me, even though he got me from behind. He waited before he did anything. He waited till I turned around, and, and then I just walked off.
Although there was a comical resolution to this affair, Dylan subsequently seemed to respond to Weberman's criticisms. He recorded and released George Jackson, a single that returned to the protest tradition of Hattie Carroll and Emmett Till, and in August 1971 decided to play at the Concert for Bangladesh in Madison Square Gardens. Organised to raise both awareness and funds for a people threatened by starvation and civil war, it was a triumphant return to the live arena.
At the Concert for Bangladesh, he looked comfortable on a stage again. At the Isle of Wight, he'd looked deeply uncomfortable. It was a poor performance, lasted barely an hour. I think he felt very comfortable with George Harrison. They were good friends, they'd hung out together in Woodstock, they'd written songs together, If Not For You, which appeared on the New Morning album. So I think George helped. Eric Clapton was on the bill. I mean, he felt he was surrounded by friends. But I think the key thing about that performance is just Dylan feeling comfortable on stage again, because he had clearly lost that. He'd made very, very few live appearances since 1966, and he had not always looked very comfortable. And Bangladesh was about getting back in the seat, really.
Yet Dylan did not remain in the seat for long. Although fans and critics were eagerly anticipating a new album, the singer's career took an unexpected turn as he made the first of many forays into the world of cinema, with his involvement in Sam Peckinpah's Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. It was a world that Dylan had been drawn to since his childhood.
You have to remember, his uncle owned every one of the 4 cinemas in Hibbing. He owned the entire chain. That presumably meant that Dylan got to see every film he wanted to see for free when he was growing up. And they'd be showing double bills, 4 different cinemas every week. Dylan was probably soaking up an enormous amount of movie lore in the great period of American filmmaking, or slightly after the great period, but, you know, seeing those films. So I'm sure that that's always been one of the great interests for Dylan. And, of course, some of his songwriting is very cinematic. So Pat Garrett is a logical extension from that.
Dylan was introduced to the film by friend Chris Christopherson and originally intended to contribute 2 songs for the soundtrack. Yet his interest in the project quickly grew.
Chris Christopherson was playing the lead in the picture, and he was, Christopherson was friends with Dylan, and they had conversations about the fact that he was starring in this film, and Dylan expressed interest in the film and being in it out of kind of nowhere. And when he expressed that, then Gordon Carroll, who was the producer of the film, got very excited. And then Dylan said, well, I'd like to see something by Peckinpah first. And he watched The Wild Bunch. And he was apparently blown away by The Wild Bunch, loved it, said, yes, I want to be in the movie. So then Gordon Carroll went back to Sam and was very excited. Oh, my God, Bob Dylan wants to be in the movie. This is tremendous. And Sam was a little leery because it wasn't his idea. He knew who Dylan was. I'm sure heard some of his music, but wasn't that super familiar with him. But more than anything, he was suspicious of a musician coming in from the outside that the producer was excited about and what really hadn't been his idea. But he was open to it, and so they agreed they would work him into the film in the small part of Alias.
In late 1972, Dylan and his family moved down to Durango for the shoot. Although the singer's scenes were restricted due to his lack of experience, from the moment he heard Dylan's compositions, Peckinpah knew that musically he had the right man on board.
Movies are, as everyone has said, a collaborative art form, and Peckinpah is very much, I think, a genuine auteur director. But even that said, it's a confluence of talents coming together, because Rudy Wurlitzer's script was very much anti the romantic mythic vision of the West. It was these sparse, stark vignettes with unwashed characters, unpoetic dialogue that made you feel like you were really meeting the kind of people that populated the West. And then Sam brought a kind of romantic lyricism to that, so because it's really a tragic romantic vision, the whole movie, but it's got a patina of reality that makes you believe the world that it's in. And then Dylan, you know, is like another tributary coming in there, and with the music adding yet another layer to the piece that was absolutely right.
In 1973, after an unsuccessful session with members of Christopherson's band, Dylan went to record at Burbank Studios. He recruited old colleague Bruce Langhorne to play guitar.
I got a call and someone said, can you come into the studio? Bob is doing he's doing a film score, yeah. And I said, I was doing film scores at that time. I said, well, he should do it with me, yeah. And they said, no, we just want you to play guitar.
Having famously recorded with Dylan on Bringing It All Back Home, Langhorne had not seen or worked with him for years and observed subtle changes in the singer's character and working methods.
Well, I noticed that he was a little more reserved, but that's understandable, you know, because by then he was like a world icon, you know. And when I knew him, he was just kind of Bob Dylan, you know, the guy who, you know, he's another folk singer, and he was not yet, you know, enshrined Bob Dylan. I found that on Pat Garrett, there were more musicians. It was in a larger venue because it was in a projection, you know, type studio. And I found that, or I felt that he was not as intimate with the band as he had been on some of those earlier Columbia sessions.
Nevertheless, Langhorne was once again captivated by Dylan's abilities as a band leader.
The unique thing about working with Dylan is that Dylan generates a very, very strong thread in his music, and it's the sort of thread that people can latch on to, and particularly musicians, good studio musicians, can latch on to and sort of get into his head and sort of generate music that's appropriate under his leadership. And I think he has a very, very strong telepathic projection or whatever that lets musicians who are empaths generally receive that communication and generate music with him based on that connection. He's a wonderful person to play in the studio with because he always has a really clear idea of what the music is going to be, what his song is going to be. And then he pretty much, he puts the people around him and he lets them just, do it however. And I think that's the best way to work artistically. The best directors that I know direct like that also.
William H. Bonney. He killed 21 men.
I don't want to kill you, Bill. No, I sure hope you don't, Billy.
And he was just a kid. Billy the Kid.
You take this. My luck's running good.
Patrick F. Garrett. He was the most dangerous outlaw in the territory. So they made him sheriff.
It's pretty fair shooting for an old married man. Just lucky, I guess.
Pat Garrett had just one friend.
Hey, Billy.
Billy the Kid. And just one job. Kill him. Now Sam Peckinpah, the director who unleashed the Wild Bunch, takes a hard new look at two old friends, Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. They were legends in their own time.
Times have changed. Times, maybe. Not me.
In May 1973, the film was released. Yet during its post-production, serious conflicts had compromised Peckinpah's original vision, and the finished work was justifiably considered a disaster.
It was one of the worst butcher jobs done on Sam's films, and it was done in a very ugly way by James Aubrey, who was the head of MGM. Sam got in a terrible pissing match with him, and Aubrey unfortunately held all the cards and took the movie away, and there was negotiations with Sam's editors, and a lot of them then eventually helped Aubrey because they wanted to try to save as much of the film as they could, and Sam had terrible, ugly fights with his editors over that. And the resulting film was it's like a shattered, it's like a beautiful vase that was shattered, and you're kind of looking at the fragments trying to figure out how the vase fit together. Jay Cox of Time was the only probably major American reviewer he said even in its maimed state it was obviously a great movie, but for the most part they knew that Sam had done a good job of letting everybody know it had been taken away from him, but a lot of reviewers, it was so hard to see that this could have been a great movie. I remember when I saw it, I read the material about how it had been recut, but I just thought, I don't see a great movie here. And that's the way most reviewers felt.
James Coburn.
Bill!
Chris Christopherson.
Come on in, Pat.
Jason Robards. Slim Pickens. Cathy Gerardo. Jack Elam.
That'd be me, Sheriff.
Rita Coolidge. Chill Wills.
Yeah.
And introducing in his first dramatic motion picture performance,
Plums.
recording star Bob Dylan.
They say that Pat Garrett got your number. Your sleep with one eye open when you...
Peckinpah's confidence in the original edit was borne out when the film was re-released in the 1980s, as it had initially been conceived. This director's cut led to a reappraisal of the work, and having previously been considered a failure, the film was finally recognised as a tour de force.
Yeah, it's killed me too.
Now, it's amazing the turnaround. It's hard to realize how low its stock was when it first came out, because now it is considered one of the 10 best Westerns made, almost no question about it. There's many people that think that it's as good or better than The Wild Bunch. It's certainly one of the 3 great Peckinpah masterpieces, the last masterpiece in my opinion.
The soundtrack album was released shortly after the film, and although several fans consider it a minor addition to the Dylan canon, others applaud its originality and its subtlety.
There's a link back to John Wesley Harding. I mean, again, you're identifying with it, with the outlaw, the underdog. You know, they're the people that he values on the Pat Garrett soundtrack. It's got Knocking on Heaven's Door on it, which is probably commercially one of his most successful songs ever. And it's got, you know, some terrific versions of the Billy theme. I really like it as a record. I think it's a lovely record, and I think it's very dense, very atmospheric.
It's a overlay of a thematic statement about the whole story and a kind of mood that it sets without trying to orchestrate every moment musically. And I think it's one of my favorite Peckinpah scores. I would certainly put it right up there with The Wild Bunch, so it's completely different. And one could argue that Fielding's score is far more sophisticated in a lot of ways. Well, it is in a lot of ways, but there's something in the simplicity of Dylan's music that's incredibly moving and lyrical also.
It's very, very evocative. You can hear that in isolation, and you can see those images. You can picture that very desolate New Mexico landscape and the forts and the wind-blown streets. And I think it's a really good record, and it's a good film. I actually think Dylan is very good in it. I think it's an underrated performance, an underrated film, and a very underrated album.
After the release of Pat Garrett, Dylan chose to change location again and began renting a house in Malibu, California. Here he was met by David Geffen, who attempted to wrestle him from his Columbia contract. Dylan's last few albums had sold poorly, and Geffen promised a change of fortune if the artist signed to his label. Yet the music world had changed, and Dylan was aware that new competitors were emerging.
What Bob Dylan had created had been taken over by other people. And I think that affected him quite profoundly. There was this generation of performers who had been so strongly influenced by him. And there's a famous story about Neil Young's Heart of Gold, which was a #1 single in America. And Dylan told the story of hearing it on the radio all the time and being very irritated because he thought it sounded like him. Of course, actually, Neil Young's voice doesn't sound anything like Dylan, but you can see where he was coming from. There were people like Jackson Browne, this whole breed of singer-songwriters, James Taylor, and they'd stepped into the vacuum that Dylan had left, really, when he vacated the stage. And I wonder if he then began to be a little bit jealous that these people were stealing his clothes.
Dylan was eventually persuaded by Geffen's assurance that with a release on Asylum, he would sell 1 million records. The package was made more enticing by the prospect of an American tour. Dylan was ready to get back on the road, and in early 1974, he would embark with the band on a historic stadium tour.
The biggest tour in the history of rock music. 18 million requests for tickets. 2% of the American population applied for tickets for this one guy who hadn't toured for 8 years. It was an absolutely seminal event, the 1974 tour. And just the fact that he was there, you know, again, it's very difficult for people to have a context for that, because here's a guy who plays 100 gigs a year. If you want to go and see Bob Dylan, it's really not difficult anymore. In 1974, it was unheard of. There was an entire generation of people who'd grown up with Bob Dylan's music who never thought they'd get a chance to see Bob Dylan, let alone actually have him play a tour of arenas.
To coincide with the tour, Dylan's first and only studio album for Asylum Records was released. Planet Waves was the first official release of Dylan originals with the band accompanying him. And once again, people spoke of a return to form.
I love Planet Waves. I think it's a wonderful minor work. It has so many great things in it for Dylan fans to enjoy. The playing is terrific. The band are wonderful on it. Dylan sings really well. There's some of that great flair in Dylan's songwriting. It's not fully realised. It's kind of 3/4 another side, 1/4 bringing it all back home. It's the mixture is not quite there, but it's certainly a return to form. After Nashville Skyline, Self-Portrait and New Morning, the idea that people wouldn't consider that a major return to form, it is.
I think you can see Planet Waves as a kind of limbering up record. It was probably the strongest set of songs that he'd recorded since John Wesley Harding. A stronger album than New Morning. But of course it preceded Blood on the Tracks. Maybe if he hadn't made Blood on the Tracks, Planet Waves would today be regarded even more highly than it is. But of course it preceded this absolute killer album, and so you see it in that context, and it's the album really where he's limbering up for Blood on the Tracks.
Dylan's forthcoming masterpiece was the result of a long and painful creative process. In July 1974, after the end of the Whirlwind Tour, he retreated to a newly bought farm in Minnesota. Sarah did not join him, and the songs that he composed during this period were the agonised and sometimes bitter work of a man whose marriage had turned sour. In September, he travelled to New York to record this new collection. Eric Weisberg was one of the session musicians recruited.
Bob came in, we had no idea what to expect, and he came in and called us over to the center where he was. We went over there and he started, we did not expect to have chord charts or, road maps and things like that. We just didn't, and we didn't. He didn't have any. So he called us over and he said, here's the first tune, and he started playing, and it was scrambling for paper, pencils and stuff to write something down, so we have something. We're kind of used to, and his songs are long. A lot of them are really long, and, you never know, so we just wanted to have stuff written down, So we were scrambling for paper and writing things down, and finally we said, okay, let's try it, and we went back to our places, and he started singing. We played along, and he asked Phil if Phil was ready to record. And Phil said, well, not really, but yeah, I'll take one. We'll take one. So we played it down, and there was definitely mistakes. Bob asked Phil if he could to play it back. And he's playing it back, and we were all in the middle of the room facing the speakers listening. So the song gets about halfway through, and Bob goes, so we go over there, and he picks up his guitar, and he starts running down the, he says, here's the second song. While we're listening to this, huge noise coming out of these speakers, and trying to see what the take was like. That was unprecedented, as far as I was concerned anyway.
Despite the unconventional practices, the album was recorded to Dylan's satisfaction and the sessions ended. Yet on his return to his Minnesota farm, he became unsure of the work, and this doubt led to a new set of Blood on the Tracks sessions, recorded closer to home.
He listened over and over again and decided it was a nice album, but that it lacked punch. It possibly lacked some commercial appeal, so he took it home over the holidays, played it for his brother David. His brother David said, it won't play on the radio. There's not a hit on here. He sounded like an A&R man for Columbia Records. I don't hear the hit. And so Bob said, so what can we do about it? David said, well, let me call Kevin and Paul Martinson, the engineer, and we'll see what we can line up. So we haggled over musicians and got the band together, and we were only planning on doing one song or two songs at the most, but it came out so well in the roughs and the first takes that we kept going and got through 5 songs within 2 sessions in a very, very short period of time, because there was never any more than one take after Idiot went. It was one take, and that was it. Bob overdubbed on virtually every song, however.
Although the same songs were recorded, many have noticed the subtle changes in Dylan's approach during the Minnesota sessions.
When artists are allowed to ruminate on their work, whether they be painters or musicians or great composers, they'll often change something. They'll put a horn section in here or this or that. And he felt that both lyrically and musically, lyrically, most of the critics, and you'll find that Clinton Halen and Howard Sounds agree that Dylan softened the lyric for Minneapolis. He was less brutal on the character who is obviously Sarah in Idiot Wind, and brought himself further into the picture, so it wasn't quite so cruel. But the treatment was tougher. He jumps right into the thing like a shotgun, like a whip on a pony. Someone's got it in for me. I mean, and this comes out of absolute thin air. He's mad, and he's mad all the way through the song, and he gets madder. And he was going for something completely different, and he got something entirely and completely different than he got in New York. We took Tangled Up in Blue in one session, and it was the most, it brought tears to my eyes during the session. 5 Minnesota farm boys, prairie lads, if you will, who'd grown up listening to this fellow on headphones in a room, playing live on what we know, all of us, is going to be a classic song. And dancing out at the end with that wonderful, beautiful, rhapsodic harmonica solo at the end of Tangled Up in Blue.
The finished album, Blood on the Tracks, was hailed as Dylan's strongest of the decade and is still regularly counted among the best records ever made.
Blood on the Tracks is the work of a mature artist. Remarkable as the work that he produced in his 20s had been, for a man who was able to bring all of that to Blood on the Tracks and the maturity of viewpoint that he hadn't had at that, to an album, and make it work as a totality, just as John Wesley Harding is a totality. Blood on the Tracks is a totality. It's as close to a perfect album as you could reasonably put together with that material. It's the greatest collection of lyrical love poems of the 20th century, bar none. Not sure anybody's really that close. It's an extraordinary combination of aspects of Dylan's genius. Nobody else could have produced a work like that, and many have tried.
I listened to the record once. Nothing, I don't remember thinking anything, whatever. I put it away, and the next time I listened to the record was when we did the Blood on the Tracks concert in Minneapolis last year, 2 years ago. When I suggested to Kevin that maybe I could sing one of the songs, he said, well, pick one out, So I had to listen to the album, pick one out. And my whole outlook and opinion of the whole thing changed 180 degrees. I think it's a fantastic album. The songs are great. I was trying to see if I could hear which tunes were the ones that we were on, the New York guys. Couldn't tell at all, really. I wouldn't swear to any of them. I said, no, that's definitely not us.
It was a return to form, and it was absolutely because he changed his mind. Bob Dylan made all the correct commercial and artistic decisions on that record himself. Everyone who speculates, Phil Ramone, myself, anyone you speak to about it has a different theory, and everyone likes certain pieces of that New York session just as well or better than some of the things that we did in Minneapolis. But the whole of the piece that he got by redoing half the album in Minneapolis, I think is tightest, most in tune, most commercial, most professionally completed masterpiece, with the exception, of course, of Blonde on Blonde, which was flawless because it had magic.
It was a strange thing, the whole album, I think, and then to go you know, a third of the way across the country or more, and then get other guys who were not really professional studio guys. But maybe that's what it needed, you know. It needed to feel a little less professional, although I still contend that I don't think we sounded all that professional. It was pretty much, and I couldn't tell who was playing which tracks, like I said. Strange, it was a strange era, a strange little segment of our recording lives.
After the release of the album and a brief visit to the south of France, Dylan returned to Greenwich Village in June 1975. While haunting the familiar clubs and bars, he fortuitously met Jacques Levy, a theatre director and playwright who had previously been introduced to Dylan the year before.
I wrote for Roger McGuinn and the Byrds before I wrote for Bob, and I believe I met Bob sometime in California. I knew who he was, of course. He had no idea who I was. But it turned out, I found out later, that he did know who I was because he'd gone to see a couple of things I'd directed. The second time we met was complete serendipity. I lived a block up. I walked out of my house on LaGuardia Place. Bob walked past me by himself on his way somewhere. I didn't know where he was going. And I said, "Bob." And he turned and looked at me. He said, "Oh, hi," and we chatted. I said, "Where are you going?" And it turned out he was going to a place that I often hung out. It's a little bar on Bleecker Street called The Other End, which is the downstairs part of the Bitter End, which is more famous. And so I went with him, and we went and had a drink together. And that's how the two of us sort of connected.
Dylan proposed that Levy work with him on the lyrics to a new album, having been specifically intrigued by the emphasis on narrative in Levy's previous work.
He had heard the lyrics that I'd written for McGuinn. He'd heard Chestnut Mare, which is the most famous of the songs I've written with McGuinn. And I think he liked the idea that I could tell a story, that there was a story in that song. Bob is not really that good at telling stories, you know. He doesn't go from A to B to C to D. And he's got a lot of good stuff in his songs, but they don't usually add up to a story. Once in a while he does. And I think he liked that.
After composing their first song, Isis, that night, they moved to Dylan's house in the Hamptons to work on the album. Over the next month, they collaborated closely, although the emphasis was on atmosphere and theme rather than on specific meaning.
The personal references in the songs, or what the songs were about, we didn't discuss. We didn't get into that. We didn't get into, what do you mean by this, what's all this kind of stuff. You know, like, I can't tell you how many times I have been asked the significance of the 5th day of May. You know, and I just fended off. I don't know the significance, and I don't care what it is. And I tell people, make up your own significance.
Levy's contribution stands today as a significant departure in Dylan's methods, when the lyrics are not an overtly personal statement, but the fruit of a collaborative partnership.
Jacques was very important. I mean, it's the only album where Bob consistently collaborated with a lyricist, and Jacques' lyric writing, I mean, coming from the Broadway background, is very erudite and, well, it's very clever, and you can hear Jacques' influence throughout that record. And Jacques' influence also, because he's looking at things from sort of a thespian point of view, I think that the little playlet element of each of the songs really comes to the fore.
To have Dylan, who, and whatever you think of him, whether you think he can't sing for toffee or, you know, is profoundly overrated, I mean, he is, you know, the single most influential singer-songwriter in rock history. And for him to collaborate is in itself interesting. You don't really know what the dynamics of the relationship were. I mean, one understands that Levy had this sort of Broadway, off-Broadway background, and I think he brought a discipline to Dylan. I think he sort of said, well, you can do that, you know, you can be more abstract, but I think if you know, let's try and stick with his character, this figure, this idea. And I think he just gave the songs a bit of a shape and a bit of discipline, which Dylan notoriously never had himself. So yeah, I think the fact that Dylan chose Jacques Levy to work with is significant of itself.
On their return to New York, the pair were looking for a band to give life to the songs. Enter Scarlett Rivera.
We were driving along one day, along Houston Street, and he saw ahead of us this quite extraordinary-looking young lady walking down the street with long black hair, carrying a violin case. It was Scarlett.
Something said to him, stop that girl. And, you know, don't let her move until you find out a few things. And that's when, you know, he found out, yes, I play, and yes, I play good. And eventually, he wanted to hear me play that day. And, you know, I pretty much ascertained pretty quickly that that was really Bob Dylan. So I wasn't too hesitant to go with him.
Sure enough, she came up to the studio, and she played the hell out of it. I mean, she played this sort of gypsy guitar, violin, and she was terrific. And she would move all over the place. She was quite an extraordinary young lady. I liked Scarlett a lot.
For the recording of this new album, Desire, Dylan and producer Don DeVito looked to assemble a group of heavyweights, including country star Emmylou Harris and legendary lead guitarist Eric Clapton. Yet with the same live recording method he'd utilised on past records, some failed to get into the improvisational spirit.
Bob is not one of these kinds of leaders. He doesn't do that. The most you'll get from him is a look. He'll give you a look to the side, and then the question, then you have to learn what that means. You have to learn, does it mean come in, or does it mean stay out? Some people can respond to that beautifully. Emmylou was amazing at that. I mean, some of the harmony stuff that she does on the record is just extraordinary. And other people just walk into a wall. I mean, they just don't have the faintest idea. And Bob really wanted people who were compatible.
One person who was compatible was bassist Rob Stoner, who saw that the problems were the result of too many players.
DeVito called me up and said Bob had asked for me to come down to the studio. So I came down to the recording studio and saw that they were having trouble recording the songs for Desire because there was just too large an ensemble to get the kind of result that Bob liked, which was more of a spontaneous type thing. So I hung out for a couple of nights when watching them not get any results, and eventually Bob took me aside because he knew me previously, and he asked me what would I do if I were in his situation. And I told him that I thought it would be better if he sent everybody home and just came in with a small new group and started fresh. And he took me up on my dare and said, we'll do that, and you call the musicians. He asked who I would like to get, and I suggested the people who he had seen me play with previously, namely my drummer, Howie Wyeth, and I thought that we would just do it as a trio. I wanted it to be really sparse. He mentioned this gypsy violinist he had met, Scarlett Rivera, thought she would be an interesting element, so we did it really as a quartet. The drummer, Scarlett, myself, and Bob. And we went in and tried it, and it clicked, and we ended up doing the album in very short order.
The sessions ended successfully, and Dylan began to formulate ideas for a tour. He envisaged a travelling circus of talented musicians, a tour unlike any he had previously embarked upon.
Now that the album was finished, then we talked about going out on tour. And I'd never done anything like that before. I mean, I'd done some music stuff, summer jobs here and there, but I'd never done a tour. And it was a great opportunity, and Bob said, well, let's do it.
Rick Danko told me that Bob had been kicking around the idea of a traveling carnival for years, even when he was still working with the band. And so it had always been something he'd had in the back of his mind of having sort of a three-ring circus act type of rock and roll show going. So I know that the germination of the idea came long before. The review itself, I think, was just something that Bob felt it was time to do something new. He had just come off working with the band. Live was the previous outing he'd had, and he needed to have something that was really different. And so he figured this was the time to pull that carnival idea out of the hat.
Dylan began playing small gigs in Paul Colby's club, The Bitter End, and many musicians began to gravitate to these impromptu sessions and to jam with the star.
These are what I call events that don't happen very often. To be part of it is exciting. We just hung out. He sort of rediscovered the village. He said this is like the old days. He had fun coming to the club. And by the way, what was good about it, I thought it was amazing. People stood and stared. They really didn't bother him. There was no autograph seekers. He was like in his own. He just enjoyed the atmosphere. It was the atmosphere he knew before he became a star. Because he even said, this is like coming home.
They would play small sets at the Bitter End, and that would be a stunning surprise for people who were coming in. It wasn't listed in the paper, and they would come in, my God, it's Bob Dylan.
I think Bob was using the stage of the Bitter End sort of as an audition place to check out various players and acts. For instance, I think he got reacquainted with what I was doing and subsequently called me up for the Desire album after he heard me backing up Ramblin' Jack Elliott at the Bitter End. The reason I was there was because I was backing up all kinds of people who needed a bass player at the time at the Bitter End, and Jack just happened to be the one who was playing there the week that Bob came down and listened. I know that I met Patty down there. Patty was coming down, and she sat in and did a few songs. And you'd see Bob sitting in the booth watching whoever was playing, and of course the word was out that Bob was sort of auditioning people. There was also this going on at Folk City, Gertie's Folk City, Mike Porco's place at the same time.
The cast of this rambling circus, named the Rolling Thunder Revue, was becoming very impressive indeed. Not only had the Byrds frontman Roger McGuinn become involved, Dylan had also signed up Rambling Jack Elliott, David Bowie's lead guitarist and bandleader Mick Ronson, and the key figure in his early success, old flame Joan Baez.
All these people got involved because this was a Bob Dylan project. And of course, they knew that anything with Bob Dylan involved was going to be a big deal for their career. So I think that pretty much explains why all these people were interested in it. And the word was out among certain circles that Bob was down in the village haunting these couple of clubs, Folk City and the Bitter End. And if you went down there, you might run into him. And if you went on stage at this little joint, that chances are word of you sounding or looking good lately might get to him, and he might actually be there. So it was the word was out that this was a chance to audition to be in this as yet unnamed and as yet unannounced format that Bob was looking to put together.
After official rehearsals at SIR Studios, Rob Stoner became an unwitting but efficient bandleader for the troupe.
There was nobody being the band leader. Everybody just expected this thing to magically come together. And I saw that it was a very confused situation which was due to dissolve into chaos very rapidly unless somebody stepped in. And it wasn't like it was my place to step in, but somebody had to step in. So by default, I just went ahead and did it. And there has to be some kind of discipline and some kind of organization to a situation like this. So I just went ahead and jumped in, having had experience as a band leader. Not that Mick Ronson didn't have experience as a band leader, or T-Bone, or any of these other people, but I just happened to be the guy who undertook to do it, and everybody just accepted my role.
Levy also took an organisational role, his stage background suiting the grand nature of the tour.
Jacques' involvement with the Rolling Thunder Revue as a stage act and his value to it was great, because we had somebody on board who had a lot of theatrical experience. Not that Sam Shepard didn't as well, but because we were mounting a 4-hour stage show, it was really great to have somebody who knew about pacing and blocking and all of the theatrical elements that are involved with moving that many people on and off a stage and keeping it going for an amount of time that will hold an audience's attention. Jacques was instrumental as was Sam, in helping us put together a cohesive show instead of just Bob Dylan getting up there and doing his songs with a few guest artists.
I hate rock and roll shows where you sit down and the next half hour you watch them plug in. I can't stand it. I just think it's such bad planning and it's so lousy. It's, I know it might be great once they start, but I just think it's horrible. And I didn't want any of that. I wanted people to come on the stage and just do their act and then get off. And we worked it out pretty well for the Rolling Thunder Revue that people could do that.
In October 1975, the tour finally opened. Playing many venues across the north of America, the band travelled together as Dylan had envisaged. On stage, however, the troupe would often struggle to keep up with Dylan's live demands, when he had a tendency to change key mid-song or count in at a different beat than the one rehearsed. Scarlett Rivera had been alerted to this tendency early on, however.
I'll give you an example of something that threw me, and I thought later that maybe he did it to be helpful, actually, was when we did the John Hammond special, which was a live TV show. We had just finished the album, and everything was in the key of that album, of course. And I was really, really quite nervous that night, because I'd never performed on a live TV show, knowing that millions of people were looking. Just before going out, Bob changed the key of the song. And for me, it made me concentrate like crazy on that. And I think in retrospect, maybe he did it to be tricky, but also maybe to help me concentrate and not be totally freaked out.
Sat together in the park as the evening sky got dark. She looked at him and he felt a spark tingle to his bones.
Bob Dylan is technically very difficult to work with, in that he just goes off on his own and he expects everybody to follow him. And he'll rehearse things one way and then do it another way entirely, and it can really throw you. And you just have to accept that that is the gig, and that's the way Bob is. And when you're going to accept the paycheck, that's the bus ride.
I don't know about later periods, but in that period, he was so supportive and not judgmental and not, looking at you like, oh, you played that wrong, or he was very embracive of the whole, how anybody played that night, or any night. He was not demanding that you play that line like a machine every night, and you play that like a machine every night. It was very organic, and he, you did not feel any sense of judgment coming towards you. Which made you feel free, And I think he enjoyed it very much, too.
While on tour, filming began on Dylan's directorial debut, the epic Ronaldo and Clara. With the help of writer Sam Shepard and beat poet Allen Ginsberg, various members of the entourage would perform during time off in this symbolic, ambitious work.
I thought it complemented the tour very nicely. And it seemed to be an integral part of the tour. On our days off, we would do these quasi-improvised dramatic scenes, the dialogue of which was sort of outlined by Sam Shepard, who was along with us. And it seemed to have a sort of a cohesive, ever-evolving thread to it, which paralleled the gigs, and that's how they wove the gigs into the eventual footage. And I thought it was a great addition to the tour.
The first leg of the Rolling Thunder tour ended in December with a benefit show for the imprisoned boxer Reuben Hurricane Carter. Carter's plight was the focus of the recently released single Hurricane, which would also be the opening track on the forthcoming Desire. It was a song, like George Jackson, that harked back to Dylan's protest roots. The night was both a valuable return to the political arena for Dylan and also a triumphant return to New York.
Oh, that was astounding and wonderful, and I got to meet Muhammad Ali afterwards, and that was just incredible. But what also led up to that concert, I don't know if anybody else told you, but we went into the prison and did a prison concert where Reuben Carter was, and that was an amazing experience. It was like maximum security prison of New York or New Jersey, wherever it was. So that preceded Madison Square Garden. So there was a huge amount of energy that went into that concert.
Coming back to play that at Madison Square Garden, Muhammad Ali was there, Hurricane Carter. We had an audio hookup to the prison with him there. That was a great moment. At the time, we really thought that we were creating some great social justice, getting Hurricane out. I mean, there really was a great degree of belief. Well, about Hurricane. Everybody really thought that Hurricane was innocent and that Bob's song was instrumental in righting a social wrong. So it was a great moment when we played at the benefit for him in December of '75.
Desire was released in January 1976 to universal acclaim. Topping the charts in both the US and the UK, it became the biggest-selling Dylan album ever.
Well, if Desire had come out at any point other than after Blood on the Tracks, it would have been hailed as a really, really top-notch Dylan album. In a way, it's had to live in the, again, like Planet Waves, it's had to live in the shadow of that extraordinary work in a way that is slightly unfair because it's a very different album. The thing about Desire is that it's a very commercial album. Dylan went out of his way to make an album that sounds enjoyable to listen to and to make, and he's trying different styles and themes that he hasn't done for a long time. Obviously, there's a couple of long ballads of outlaws and rogues that he's celebrating in there, and he's using a co-lyricist for the first time on any kind of extended basis with Jacques Levy. So there's a lot to celebrate about the album.
I think that sound he gets is a real freewheeling, gypsy sort of sound to it. Intriguing stuff, something like Isis he did with Jacques Levy, some really intriguing images. Romance and Durango, again, that Pat Garrett feel to it. It's got Sarah on it, which is a lovely love song to his wife. I think he's really trying to do something different musically on it as well. I think that the violin and the guitar and just all sorts of different permutations, Emmylou Harris. I think it's a really undervalued record in his career.
Scarlett, in particular, was given prominence on the final mix, her violin as integral as Dylan's harmonica.
I distinctly remember being in the studio, going back to, knowing, having listened to him prior to this, huge meeting that ended up, in a recording studio with him, and really loving his music prior to that, knowing the role his harmonica played. So, of course, when, you know, we came to the harmonica solo, you know, I put the violin down. And he looked at me and said, keep playing. I went, oh. So I kept playing, and evidently he muted the harmonica later in some cases, or he put them together. So no, it was a huge revelation to me.
Everything about the approach was different from what he'd done previously. And the sort of gypsy flavor to her playing also really set it off. The fact that she played in a very simple blues-type way instead of any fancy violin stuff or the stock old country licks that you hear all the time. It was an interesting and romantic, mysterious element that it lent to the songs.
I was overwhelmed, really, you know, that I ended up being that prominent, you know. And our relationship really was wonderful right from the beginning, you know. There was a real chemistry and a real connection. And I just felt also that he was kind of, you know, lifting me up, you know, deliberately and by choice for some reason. And, you know, he just saw whatever he saw in me and whatever he heard in the playing was something that really moved him in such a way that, like, was quite astounding to me, you know, and I wouldn't have expected it.
In April, the second leg of the Rolling Thunder Revue began, this time focusing on the Bible Belt and the southern half of America. Despite the fact that Desire was such a hit, the atmosphere was not as magical as before.
When the tour cranked up for the second time in early '76, the second Rolling Thunder Revue tour, we not only had the thrill of doing a Bob Dylan tour, but the thrill of being a group that had done a hit record. Of course, the Rolling Thunder Revue was more exciting the first time around because it was new. The second time, it needed a little bit of a boost because it had already been done. And also, we were doing it in an area of the country where Bob's fan base wasn't as rabid as it was in the Northeast, where he had done the first leg of the tour.
There was quite a dynamic change. I can't really put my finger on it, but there was some kind of interdynamic change within the band and with him, or with him with us. And there were other, you know, personal problems that started emerging that sort of spilled into the band, I believe.
Yeah, I could definitely feel that Bob wasn't as into it. The novelty of touring with the Revue had definitely worn off after the first tour. And also the ticket sales weren't as good for the second leg. And at the same time, I think the fact that Bob wasn't making a lot of money was starting to get to him. During rehearsal, we had heard that Phil Ochs had died. And meanwhile, he had been turned down for the tour. He's one of the people who sort of auditioned for it and could have really used the break and ended up not making the cut. And he killed himself. And perhaps that was his last, I often wondered if maybe that had been Phil's last hope at a lifeline, is getting that to rejuvenate his career. But it didn't work out that way for Phil.
When the tour ended, Dylan took some much-needed time out. In November, however, he stepped onto stage again for the farewell concert of the band. Known as The Last Waltz, it was expertly captured by maverick New York director Martin Scorsese in his film of the same name.
Dylan's job was to go out there and perform, which he did exceptionally well. I thought it was a beautiful performance. And also, I think he was very photogenic at that time as well for the film. And there's a story that he had a clash with Neil Diamond. As Neil Diamond walked off, he said something to Dylan about follow that, and Dylan said, what do I have to do, walk on and fall asleep? No, a great performance, and a good performance by many of the artists as well. I mean, it was a very, very good lineup, I think.
In 1977 was a quiet year for Dylan publicly, but privately it was one of the hardest of his life. Divorce proceedings began with estranged wife Sarah, and while ensnared in this emotional and legal mess, Dylan set to work cutting Ronaldo and Clara. At the close of 1977, Dylan had the film finished and began preparations for a new tour. Again, Rob Stoner was called.
I never expected to hear from him again. I figured that the Rolling Thunder was a finite thing, and since I knew he wasn't having too good a time on the second leg of it, I figured that I was associated with Rolling Thunder, and that was that. So I was very surprised when he called me up in '77. I think it was late fall of '77, and told me that he wanted me to come out to LA with a few musicians and put together a new band to do a world tour. I was knocked out, flattered and surprised that he called me a second time.
In January 1978, while Dylan prepared for the tour, Ronaldo and Clara was released to terrible reviews. With its extended running time and impenetrable yet pretentious symbolism, it disappeared, having only played 3 American cities.
The reaction to the film was very poor, especially in America. I mean, it got very good reviews at the Cannes Film Festival, and it did run for 3 months in cinemas in London. But certainly, generally, and especially in the States, the reception was very bad towards the film. Whether people couldn't understand it or didn't want to understand it, is an argument. But also, I think there were several reviews that stated the fact that Dylan was trying to portray himself as Jesus Christ, and it got panned really very badly. And clearly, Dylan lost a lot of money on the film.
Well, I remember when it opened in London in 1977, 78. And I thought, oh, great, what could be better, a 4-hour Bob Dylan film? And so actually, what would be better would be probably a 2-hour Bob Dylan film. Yeah, I think Bob as film director, don't give up the day job. I mean, it was just not a good film. It was not a good film. Great concert footage. Again, Rolling Thunder, top of his game. Some terrific stuff. The live concert footage was great. But oh dear, I mean, all this sort of tedious, who's Bob Dylan? I'm Bob Dylan, and masked men, and just forget it. It's just dreadful, dismal, dismal experience.
Despite escalating financial problems, Dylan flew out to Japan in February to open the new world tour. A greatest hits show, it featured a large band more strictly organised than on the Rolling Thunder shows.
In '78, he made the decision that he was gonna do a big world tour anyway. He was going to take a big band on the road. Believe it or not, he was profoundly affected by seeing Neil Diamond in terms of how to actually present a show, how to pace it, and how to get people to actually respond to it. The style of show that he then embarked on in '78 didn't really suit him, and I think he came to realise that fairly quickly. But it was a very brave experiment, and it had great moments.
Stoner, too, was having difficulties with the big band setup. He was having significant problems with the background singers, and although he was the band leader, he was not able to fully exert his authority.
Well, I think that that the background singers were the least musical of the sections in the band, and if we had insisted on arranging things the way a large band is usually arranged, namely with written arrangements. These were all head arrangements, and they involve people remembering their parts and executing them identically from performance to performance. The backing singers, 2 of them were very skilled at this, and 1 of them was not. The one who wasn't happened to be someone who Bob was very fond of, and I had to stay on her case a lot because she was messing up the sound from night to night. And of course, this created problems between Bob and myself. And so I was between a rock and a hard place with this. I mean, do I let this girl keep singing off key and messing up the sound of the entire band, or do I risk pissing off somebody who Bob is very tight with?
In the end, a parting of company was necessary.
It was sort of mutually decided that I would leave the tour. I became very unpopular amongst the other musicians because I was the band leader. So I was making all these decisions on Bob's behalf, and I would be the bearer of bad tidings to people. I had to stay on everybody's case about do this, don't do that. And the musicians came to resent me because they couldn't get an answer from Bob. They would have to get an answer from Bob through me. And I had to stay on everybody's case about their problems. And eventually it was decided that it would be better off if I left. And I wasn't too happy there either. So I left the employ of the Dylan organization at that time.
In May, Dylan rush-recorded a new album with the big band arrangement, Street Legal. Released in June, for many it was a disappointment after the benchmark set by the previous 2 records. A work let down by Dylan's lack of care in the studio and his increasing willingness to compromise for commercial success.
He toured Japan, and the Japanese promoter actually faxed him a list of the songs that he expected Dylan to perform on the tour. And Dylan pretty much took it and did the songs that the Japanese wanted. Now, you know, there was a time when nobody told Bob Dylan what he was going to sing. In fact, quite the opposite. If you told Bob Dylan that you wanted him to sing The Times They Are A-Changing, then that was the one way to ensure that he wouldn't sing it. And yet here was the Japanese promoter dictating Dylan's set list to him. So I think there was something deeply unsatisfying to Dylan himself about what was going on with his touring at that time, and probably that spilled over onto Street Legal, because it's a record that has got the bones of a fine album and should have been a lot better than it was, but has to be deemed a failure.
In September, Dylan and his band began the American leg of the tour. Yet the warm reception they'd received across the globe was not to follow them home, and the concerts came under heavy critical fire.
In England, everybody remembers, and in Europe, and in Australia and Japan, everyone remembers those shows very fondly. I mean, the people were blown away by those shows. I mean, The Sun ran a full-page headline which ran "The greatest concert I've ever seen" as their review of Dylan's 78 Earls Court concert. You know, and a lot of the reviews were, I mean, they really were hyperbolic. So when he ended up in America at the end of the tour, he was, you know, taken aback to discover that the Americans hated it. The reviewers, I'm not talking about the audiences. The audiences seemed to still be very enthusiastic about what he was doing. But the critics and the reviewers really did seem to, you know, have their teeth into Dylan. Ronaldo and Clara had been a big flop. Street Legal had not done well, and they all decided, as one it would appear, to give the uppity man from Hibbing a good kicking, metaphorically.
Yet on the second month of the American tour, Dylan experienced a seismic personal event, an epiphany that would transform him completely.
One night in November, you know, when his spirits were low, you know, he had a vision of King of Kings, Lord of Lords, and everything changed. He became literally born again, meaning, you know, he really became another man again. You know, but it was his most extreme reinvention.
This reinvention once more irreversibly altered the artist, and the hip, angry young folk rocker of the 60s and the ever-changing searcher of the 70s were replaced by a man certain for the first time that he really did know the absolute truth. A decade was closing, and Dylan was about to re-emerge as a very different singer and go through the most tumultuous period of his career to date. Where many viewed this transformation as a betrayal, others welcomed it as yet another metamorphosis in an ever-changing man and career.
Every time Bob has reinvented his music and his philosophy, he's enhanced his artistic stature and expanded it in a new direction. I mean, the guy never ceases to amaze me how he keeps reinventing himself. Always challenging himself, coming up with something new.
In 1965, Bob Dylan divided the world into the hip and the unhip. And in 1979, he divided the world into the saved and the damned. That's it. That's the only difference.
In this difficult decade of his career, Dylan had fought the barrage of abuse levelled at his country persona and emerged once more as a vital and unique artist, able to survive the 60s to present a new vision in a new decade. The future, however, would continue to be an uphill battle.